Welcome to Obia Apothecary, the channel where we dig deep into ancestral wisdom, spiritual practices, and the tools that connect us to our roots and our true selves. I'm your host, Ailey, and today we're stepping into somewhat of a hot topic that's been close to my heart. And the topic is hoodoo. So if I'm being honest, my own journey with hoodoo didn't really start until I was ready to start asking myself deeper questions about my ancestors, my own spiritual path, and really trying to explore how I could connect with traditions that I knew were created by my ancestors as tools of survival and empowerment. Growing up, I only knew the stereotypes about hoodoo. I knew that it was scary, dark, witchcraft, something that you didn't talk about for fear of being judged. So maybe that's been your experience, or you've heard some of the same things. But when I really started learning the truth about hoodoo, I really realized that it's a rich cultural tradition. It's a tradition of resilience, healing, and self-love. It's not about fear. It's not about harm. It's all about reclaiming power. And this is the kind of power that our ancestors used to navigate in a world that tried to strip all of their power from them. So in today's episode, we're going to bust some of the most common myths about hoodoo. We're going to dive into its history and how it connects to our modern lives, and explore how it can become a tool for healing and self-love. And of course, I'll share some resources if you're ready to start your own journey or learn more. So grab your tea, light a candle, and let's start peeling back the layers of hoodoo to uncover its truth and beauty. All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about myths. Because honestly, as we know, when it comes to hoodoo, there is no shortage of myths and misunderstandings. And let me tell you, when I first started learning about this practice, there was so much that I had to unlearn about what I thought I knew. So today I want to just take some time down and very quickly break down 3 of the biggest misconceptions about hoodoo. Myth number 1, hoodoo is the same as voodoo. This one is so common that even people who mean well oftentimes get it wrong. Hoodoo and voodoo are just simply not the same thing. When you think about New Orleans is really famous for both. But while voodoo, is a religion, it has its own deities, its own ceremonies, and it has Haitian roots, hoodoo is more so of a folk practice. Hoodoo does not require any type of worship. It's a system of working with herbs, roots, and ancestral guidance to kind of empower you to create change in your own life. So in voodoo, you might see a ceremony honoring an Iwa like Papa Legba. In hoodoo, on the other hand, a ritual might help someone create a protective mojo bag using herbs like rue and salt, and that might be paired with a song from the Bible to help ward off negative energy. They're completely different, but they do both have African origins. So that is a similarity. Myth number 2, hoodoo is evil or satanic. I have heard this one so many times that it makes my head spin. Growing up, I was told that hoodoo was dark magic. It was something that you just didn't mess with. It was evil. And that fear actually didn't come from people who know about the practice or the practice itself. It came from the way colonizers and missionaries demonized African spiritual traditions. But here's the truth. Hoodoo is deeply spiritual, and for many practitioners, it's even tied into Christianity. A lot of hoodoo spells and rituals actually incorporate the Bible. An example is Psalm 23, the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd. That one is recited oftentimes for protection, as an affirmation in the morning, and just to kind of close out a ritual. It's truly not about devil worship. It's about drawing on divine and ancestral power to protect yourself and your family. Myth number 3. Hoodoo is about harming others. If we're being honest, this has Hollywood written all over it. For movies like The Skeleton Key to shows that just throw in hoodoo as some last minute plot device, it's often portrayed as something dark or dangerous, but in reality, hoodoo is mostly about healing and protection. For example, a hoodoo practitioner might create a honey jar spell to help sweeten a relationship, or they might create a cleansing bath with herbs like hyssop and rosemary to remove negative energy. These practices are spiritual, and they're really about nurturing yourself, your family, and your community, not causing harm. So that being said, hoodoo is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used in different ways, and it can also be misused. But its foundation, the soul of it, is rooted in survival, justice, and connection to something that's greater than ourselves. So I'm interested, how many of these myths have you heard before? I remember when I first started exploring hoodoo, I was shocked just at how wrong I was about most of what I've been told. But I mean, I think that's the power of reclaiming our stories. We really get to see the beauty and strength our ancestors left for us, and we get to reclaim it. So in the next segment, we're going to dive into the history of hoodoo, how it came to be, how it survived through slavery, and how it continues to evolve today. So stay with me. All right, so hoodoo's roots really do go back to the spiritual traditions of West and Central Africa, where our ancestors believed in the power of nature, spirits, and ancestors. And these practices were really a way of life for them, and they were a way for them to connect with the divine, to seek protection, to find guidance. When Africans were forcibly brought to the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade, they wanted to find a way to carry these traditions with them in their minds, their hearts, and their spirits. But as they arrived in this new and hostile land, they quickly learned that they would be forced to adapt, and they had to adapt. And in my opinion, this is where the beauty of hoodoo begins to emerge, because it's not just an African tradition. It's truly a blend of African spirituality, Native American herbal knowledge, and it even has some European influences like the Bible. An example is enslaved Africans learned to use local plants from Native Americans. They integrated Christian prayers into their rituals as a way to learn to cloak their practices from their enslavers. And this blending makes me think of growing up, if you saw like an elder and they had a Bible open on their kitchen table and it was right next to a jar of herbs and a little pouch that no one was allowed to touch, you may not have realized it, but that was their way, the elders' way of keeping their traditions alive, even in a new world. You can even picture an altar, and this is a simple one with just a candle, a few herbs, and maybe a piece of jewelry or a picture of a loved one. And you may not have even realized it then. But if you've ever seen something like that in the elder's home, you've really already seen the spirit of hoodoo at work. So during slavery, hoodoo became, for the enslaved people, really more than just a spiritual practice. It really was a lifeline. I mean, imagine being stripped of your home, your language, your culture, and trying so hard to find a way to hold on to your identity through different rituals and practices. To so many of our ancestors, hoodoo was this. It was this source of empowerment and resistance. And enslaved Africans also used hoodoo to protect themselves, to find strength, and in some instances, even resist their oppressors. I mean, there are stories of people placing protective charms in their living spaces or using powders to keep harm away. Of course, one of the most famous examples is a story of Harriet Tubman, who was said to rely on visions and spiritual guidances, practices that are deeply tied to hoodoo, as she led enslaved people to freedom through the Underground Railroad. And for them, it wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming power in a world that seemed to be designed to strip it away. And I think for a lot of our ancestors, hoodoo became this quiet rebellion, this way to say, we're still here. And we are still very, very powerful. So, I don't know, I always think about like my ancestors during this time, and it's like just so humbling to realize that what they did and what they believed in wasn't just about getting through the day. It was about building something for us, for the future generations. Like, just imagine a hand-carved charm or a small bundle of herbs tucked away for protection. These small and so very humble objects just held so much meaning and power. Like, if you have any family heirlooms or stories that have been passed down, I feel like these carry traces of history too. Like, these are ways to remain connected to our ancestors. So after emancipation, hoodoo didn't disappear. It was still needed, so it evolved. And the freed African Americans, they carried these traditions with them into new communities where hoodoo continued to serve as a source of healing, guidance, and empowerment. In so many ways, hoodoo just became that bridge between the old and the new. It became passed down through oral traditions. It was kind of taught in whispers and was practiced in secret, especially in the face of continued discrimination and just kind of these negative thoughts about hoodoo and about African spirituality. So even as like the Black people began to integrate into broader American society, hoodoo was still a way for them to stay connected to their roots. And it also found its place in a fight for civil rights as people turned to spiritual strength to try to face systemic oppression. And I feel like today what I'm seeing is hoodoo is experiencing this revival as younger generations reclaim their heritage and start trying to seek healing through ancestral practice. I think it's so incredible to see how something that began as a tool for survival has really become a way to thrive, heal, and connect more closely and more deeply than we have before in modern times. I think about how hoodoo is still very much alive in our everyday lives, even if we don't always recognize it. I mean, you think about the family member that always insisted on putting certain herbs in their baths or lighting candles during prayer. You know, back then you could think, oh, it's just their way of relaxing. But as you get older and you start to learn, you're like, maybe it was their way of trying to reconnect with something bigger. You can think about modern altars. They look different. It could just be a cloth with a table and something to reconnect them, crystals, a glass of water. But it's really proof that this practice is still alive, that it's still evolving, and really that it's still deeply, deeply meaningful to so many people of the African diaspora. So I also want to share something with you all, because for too long we've been told that our ancestral wisdom was lost, that African spirituality was something to fear, and that our connection to the unseen world was broken. But the truth is, our ancestors are still with us, and their wisdom still flows through us. So if you have a desire to reconnect with the spiritual practices that were meant for all of us of the African diaspora across the world, or if you're curious about ancestral veneration, root work, and energy healing, if you're ready to break generational curses and reclaim your divine ancestral power, my new book, Sacred Roots, is your guide to African spirituality in the modern world, because it's really time to remember who you are. We're not lost. We're simply remembering, I say.